10 o'clock on my little handy dandy iPhone, so I'm assuming that's about the time we're supposed to get started, right? All right. We're going to talk about 3 things today, and then we'll talk about whatever you all want to talk about as well. First thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is some of my history, and then I'm going to talk with you some about tools that you can use in this thing we call presentation. And throughout this whole thing, the thread is going to be the science behind this stuff. So those are the 3 things we're going to talk about. I have a couple of questions for you to start off. I'm wondering, how many of you have ever been to a presentation where someone gets up in front of you and the first thing that you see up on the screen is their resume? Anybody seen that? Where they have all their credentials and it's a list of things that they've done, and it's like, okay, you're thinking, am I supposed to be interviewing this person or whatever? Many of us have seen that. How about this one? How many of you have ever been to a session where you come in and someone puts up a list of bullet points, and then they turn to the slide and they start reading the bullet points to you? Anyone seen that?
Every time.
On the resume, can you think of a more boring way to start a presentation? And on the reading the bullet points to you, I'm assuming, and raise your hand if you can, but I'm assuming everyone here can read, right? Okay, very good. First test passed. How about this one? Have you ever been in a presentation and someone puts up on the screen an Excel spreadsheet and says, I know you people in the back can't see this. And the back of the room might start about here. And I have a question for that person. What's the point? What are we trying to achieve by putting up something that no one can see? The only person in the room that type of presentation is designed for must be the person who's facilitating the discussion, because they can see it and apparently they thought it was important. So today, let's talk a little bit about the science behind that. But let me get started with some of my history. Just so you know, so none of you are worried, there's a seat up here, guys, if you want, or there's a couple up here, and there's one here, one back there, one there. There's some here and there. There you go. Thank you for helping. In case you all are wondering, if you don't like giving public presentations, you think, man, boy, do I really suck at that. Don't worry. I hold the award for the worst presentation ever given. Now, granted, it was a few years ago. I was a junior in high school. And they asked me to do a presentation on a science project, and I chose to do a book report, and the book was Psycho-Cybernetics. Thank you. Has anyone read that book?
Who would?
Exactly. Well, my presentation, the day of my presentation, I hadn't read it either, because when I first opened it, I realized this book is more boring than anything possibly you could read. And so I didn't read it either, but I did carry it around for 2 weeks before my presentation, and thought, well, that was close enough, and I knew the title really, really good. The day my presentation came, I'm sweating, I'm nervous, I'm dry throat, anything you can think of. I'm shaking like a leaf, and I'm called up to the room, and I gave my presentation, and my presentation was this. I walked up with my little book in my hand, I'm shaking, and I looked down at my little book, and I said, Psycho-Cybernetics is about visualization. That was my presentation. From there,
That was long, right?
I don't think I could have survived any longer. I was surprised that I survived that long. From there, though, I have spoken before groups of over 7,500. I've spoken to groups like this quite often. And so I worked from being that nervous person who was sweating profusely, not able to formulate words, not able to formulate ideas, to something approaching maybe perhaps a better presentation. That's what this is about today. We're going to talk a little bit about how we go about doing that. So let's get started. The first thing I would like you to do is look at your little handy dandy handouts on your desk, on your table. Inside there's a picture that looks similar to this. I'd like you to team up with someone there at your table if you would. But I'd like you to team up with someone in groups of two. And I'd like you to answer this question. Wait! Come back! I'd like you to answer this question for me. How long do we have when we get up in front of a group like yourselves to present? How long do we have before we lose our audience? How many seconds? How many minutes? How many hours, days, weeks, months? Whatever you think it is, write that number down.
What are we doing?
Hey, everybody. Come back. Everybody get a number? Okay, now, working individually, not copying off one another, and quietly. No, you're not going quietly. But working individually, I would like you as closely as you can, but verbatim, all right? There are some little bullet points on that handout. What I want you to do is I want you to think about all the presentations you've ever seen in your life from the time you were a baby until now. And I want you to write down verbatim any bullet points you can remember.
Not including what we've done.
Preferably not. That's cheating. Any bullet points you can remember. You can use today if you'd like, as verbatim as you can remember. I want the bullet point. I don't see a lot of writing. So let's move on to something else. Let's ask this question. What did you guys come up with in terms of how long I have to capture your attention before I lose you? 10 seconds?
8 seconds.
8 seconds, 30 seconds? I'm sorry, 5 seconds? 2 minutes?
1 minute.
1 minute. According to John Medina in his book Brain Rules, by the way, you don't have to write any of this up there, it's on the back little handout. John Medina, and also my personal website, hrhiring.wordpress, is on there as well, and this presentation and these notes are up there. So if you'd like to take a lot of notes, that's okay, but you don't have to. John Medina in his book Brain Rules, which is a fabulous read, big chances, far different than psychosecretary. He talks about 30 seconds. We have about 30 seconds to grab an audience's attention. That too is echoed by people like Cliff Atkinson or Nancy Duarte or Gar Reynolds. All these people are gurus of this thing called public presentations. And they talk about that. 30 seconds is what we have, all right? We're going to come back to the bullet points here in a little bit. So let's just keep thinking about the bullet point. Have the room when you go ahead and write down, all right? But you're looking for something that's verbatim. Let's talk about Gar Reynolds' book, Presentation Design, for just a second. Because he talks about a mnemonic in that thing, an acronym that he uses called PUNCH. PUNCH, each of the letters stands for a word. He talks about using this in our opening, as far as when we start a presentation, use punch in our presentation. What he's talking about there The P in punch stands for something personal. Talk about something personal. It doesn't have to be real dramatic. It can be something simple, like a simple story about the first presentation ever given by mankind. But talk about something, make it a little bit personal with your audience, and share something like that. The U in punch stands for something unexpected. So do something a little bit unexpected. Like for instance, you might be expecting a presentation with slides and bullet points and lots of words today. I'm going to give you something a little bit unexpected. It's also, along those lines, a little bit novel. So we have personal, we have unexpected, and we have novel. And that doesn't mean hand your audience a bunch of books and have them read. All right? Let me do something a little bit unique. I used the iPhone because Steve Jobs was a magnificent presenter. And many people will argue that, well, yeah, but who couldn't present the iPhone? Who couldn't present the iPod or the iPad? Who couldn't do that presentation? He was a magnificent presenter, regardless of what the product was that he was presenting. And part of the things he did was something I did here today. He used the 3-act play. Does anyone remember the 3 acts I told you we were going to talk about? My history, tools, and science. If you open a presentation, think about using the 3-act play as your model. The other thing I'm doing today that's maybe a little bit unexpected, a little bit novel, and some of you have caught it, some of you haven't, is I haven't looked at my slides yet. That's a lot harder than you think. Because like the next one is challenging, and I have to be thinking, okay, all right, challenging is coming up, what is that? And I'm trying to remember that at the same time you're trying to talk. But not looking at your slides, or introducing the slide before you put it up on the screen. Like the next one is challenging. Introducing the slide. And then one after this is humor. Introducing the slide. Now we go back to challenging. But introduce the slide makes me the presenter and PowerPoint the tool. Otherwise, I'm the tool and PowerPoint's the tool. I always think of the tool. So if you can, again, it's quite difficult, but if you can, try to introduce your slide as opposed to it introducing the next subject. Okay? And it's sort of simple too now, because a lot of times we can have our screen up and we can, glance down at it real quick and see what's up. All right, so personal, unexpected, novel, challenging. Challenge your audience with something unique, something novel, but challenge them to learn something, take away something. I want you guys to take away the science from this presentation. The science of presentation is very defined, very dramatic, and it starts with a 30-second goal. All right, let's talk about the final letter in punch, humor, where I'm most comfortable. Humor, we have to understand, is a bit of a double-edged sword. When I'm at Tyler Technologies, and I put this up, it's like in here we have people who understand information technology. You put this up, they laugh, they smile. When you put it up into a group that doesn't know technology, they look at it and they look at you like, oh, how's that funny? So you follow it up with something like this. A bit different response. Humor is really, really valuable. It's a great way to sell. It's an excellent way to sell a very difficult concept. It's a double-edged sword. Because some humor works and some humor doesn't work as well. The other side of it is if you use humor, and by the way, if someone in here is not humorous, I'm not a funny guy, I can't do it, don't do it. You don't have to use all the letters in these things. You can use 3 or 4 of them. But if someone's not funny, please don't try to be. It is funny when people who aren't humorous try to be humorous, but it's not funny. But if we use humor, we should direct that humor to ourselves. We should not direct that humor to our audience. If I pick on someone in this audience, the rest of the audience for the rest of the presentation is petrified that I'm going to pick on them. That's not what I want you all to be, sitting there petrified. I want you to be engaged with me. So when I want to be humorous, I talk about the worst presentation anyone's ever given to mankind. It was mine. I point to myself, and I point to an area of competence, not to an area that I'm not so confident in. If I point to non-confident areas and make fun of myself, then I'm just a silly boob in front of the room. So you point to areas where you have some competence. The best example of how to use humor I can probably give is with a group I worked with, State National Bank. Obviously, it was a banking entity. We had a bunch of tellers that would come in, and part of my job as a human resources person was to onboard them, new hire orientation. One of the things the owner said was, we want to make sure when these tellers come in, they understand they can't steal from us. And I said, do you not think people coming into work understand they can't steal from us? Regardless of my argument, they were like, well, we absolutely need to ensure they know no stealing allowed. So I said, okay. My first group of tellers came in. I thought about it a lot because I really hate to look at people and go, you're a thief, walk into our bank. I hate that type of relationship. So I brought them in to the new hire orientation. They all sat down and said, okay, here's the deal. Let me ask you this question. If I come into your bank and you're over here tellering, you've got all your money out, and you're tellering away, and I walk across the lobby, I reach across to your teller drawer, and I pull out a bunch of money, and I stuff it in my pocket, and I run out the bank, am I A, going to get a promotion, B, going to get a raise, or C, going to be asked to go do something else? Ha, 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 ha. They understood we can't steal from the bank, because Rex wouldn't get a raise, he wouldn't get a promotion, he'd get terminated. I didn't have to call anyone in the room a thief, and they walked out thinking, hey, this is a pretty cool place to work. Oh, and by the way, if someone steals from us, they're going to be fired. So be careful, please, if you're using humor. Use it directly for yourself, but understand it's a double-edged sword. All right? Your handy-dandy handout's coming in handy now. There's another picture in there of fuzzy people. What I'd like you to answer is this question. You answer it in your teens again. And those of you who aren't part of the team yet, just grab somebody because it didn't seem to matter that much before. I would like to know how long we have after we learn something. Do we lose at least 50% of that knowledge if we're not using it? Does that make sense?
Yes.
How many seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, weeks, whatever you think it is. How long do we have? would like you to write down any ideas you remember from those presentations. Any ideas? You don't have a handy-dandy handout. I'm not handy-dandy handouts, but if you want one.
There's 3 extras
Oh,
right here.
okay, there's 3 here, but also on my website, this, like I said earlier, these notes and things are there at hrhiring.wordpress. You're welcome to go there later and get it, obviously, or just use a piece of paper right now. Okay, so what did we get as far as how long we have after we learn something before we start, before we've lost at least 50% of it? Who's got a number? 1 hour. Now 1 hour. 30 minutes. 45, everything to 45. Anybody else?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Say that.
A day?
You should sleep when you say that.
Once you go to sleep and wake up, that's great. A couple of days. 15 minutes, 5 minutes? 15 minutes. Herman Ebbinghaus was a psychologist guy in the early 1900s. He did a bunch of tests. And it's really interesting if you think about our education system and whatnot, and how we basically learn and how we bring people in the room. We sit them down and we talk to them and we write them on a whiteboard, or it used to be a chalkboard, or we have handouts or whatever, how we teach. But he did this study in the 1900s. It's been replicated over and over and over again. If we don't lose the information that we're receiving in a group, we lose at least 50% in the first few hours. So about a day, pretty close. First few hours, we lose about 50%. Within a month, we've lost 90%. It's gone. And what's interesting at Tyler Technologies, and some of you have been through this with our implementation, sometimes we come in, we do training, and then 6 months later, we're coming in and we go live. And then we wonder why our support calls are so high. I don't know, it's hard to figure out. Part of the science is if we're going to teach something, we need to have people go away and use that something, or they lose it. Today I talked to you earlier about I want you to get the science out of this presentation. If you walk away with the science, you'll be able to do better presentations in the future. That's the whole core of this presentation, is to give you an element of the science. We'll come back to the light bulbs along with the bullet points here in just a minute, but I'd like to talk about a wonderful book I'm sure some of you have read, Chip and Dan Heath's book, Made to Stick. How many have read that book? A few of us have. It's a wonderful book. I commend it to your reading. It's not about presentation. It's about how do you make ideas stick, so it's all about presentation. What you're trying to do, I can't think of a greater thing for me today if you walk out of this room and some of the ideas that I present stick. You're able to remember them. They use also, actually their whole book is a mnemonic, another acronym, success. And I understand the way they spell success is not right. But if you think about it, we don't say success, do it. So maybe it's supposed to go with one S. But each one of these letters, like with punch, stands for something. And what the first S in success stands for is simple. Try to make your ideas simple. That is not to suggest that people aren't able to understand complex ideas. But a simpler idea is easier to understand. The U in success stands for the same thing as the U in punch. Does anyone remember what that is? Unexpected. Yay! Unexpected. Again, do something unexpected. What we're talking about here is, I don't want to jump up on one of the tables and dance around with a lampshade on my head. You guys think, that's really unexpected. Something unexpected that relates to what we're talking about. I like the way this room is set up, by the way, because one of the things I usually do is I reset a room. I hate square rooms. Square rooms are boring. And people understand it. I'm walking into a lecture. It's boring. The next thing we talk about in success is concrete. Something has to be concrete. Let me ask you this question. Just think to yourself for a minute. If I ask you to define love, ask you to define embrace, how would you define embrace? A lot easier. Love is ethereal. It's kind of, if I ask that question, I get multiple answers. With embrace, I'd get multiple answers too, but I only get 2 or 3. There would be some consistency. With love, it can be all over the place, especially for guys. The second C in success stands for credible. We have to be credible. And that person who I talked about putting their resume up at the beginning with all their credentials, and their MA and PhDs, and their SPHRs or CPAs, whatever the other credentials they have, they're establishing their credibility, are they? They're saying, okay, that person knows what they're talking about. But I have to tell you, if I got up here and I told you I had a doctorate in slidology and an MA in presentation, and then I gave the worst presentation you've ever seen in your life, you wouldn't walk out going, ooh, boy, he really knew what he's talking about, didn't he? You walk out thinking, oh, he sucked. So credibility is established in a couple different ways. Our credentials do some of that, but more importantly, what we present and how we present it as well. If we know what we're talking about, that's what we're doing. The E in success is a very important word. It stands for emotion. When I got out of college at Texas Tech, I went to work for the university. And one of the things was they had a 2-day new hire orientation, which seemed like 2 weeks, but it was 2 days. And we walked in, we sat down, there were probably 300 of us in a room, we were all in these chairs, all square. And the first person out on the stage was a guy in a gray suit and a red tie. And he walked out with a 3-ring binder. Most of you don't even know what a 3-ring binder is probably, but it's like an iPad on your rings. Walked out with a 3-ring binder across the stage, and he walked out like this. Up to the podium, he opened the 3-ring binder, he turned his head down, and he started reading from the binder. Welcome to Texas Tech, you will do an exciting career. This will be the most exciting thing. And I was gone. I knew I was working at an exciting university, exciting career, because those are the first things out of his mouth. I remembered those things. But for an hour and 45 minutes, never lifting his head or his voice, he talked about the exciting career we had embarked on at Texas Tech. It's okay to offer a little bit of emotion. If you want to see a really good example of this, on the back of my little handy-dandy handout are some TED Talks. One of those is Shane Quicksand. I don't know if you've seen Shane's stuff, but if you haven't, he's great. He's a spoken word poet, so there is some profanity. So if some of you don't like profanity, don't watch Shane. It's very well used, but don't watch him. But he shows you how to use emotion probably better than anyone I've seen for a very long time. I actually had an opportunity a few months ago to see him in person. It was just amazing. When you take 600 people in a room and you can have them stay engaged and looking forward and quiet for an hour, and you're doing poetry. To have that type of presentation skill would be amazing. All right. The last letter in success is the most important one I'm going to give you today as far as the word, and that is story. Tell stories. You all have great stories. I actually have a journal of my stories that I use, and so it's become easy for me just to pull things out of the hat. But tell stories that relate to what you're presenting. And maybe it's if you're presenting software or something complicated, maybe it's someone having some struggle to know your audience is going to have with that software and how they overcame that struggle. Stories are super powerful. The things you're going to remember from today, I will guarantee you that if you see me at Connect this year at our users conference, or if I'm fortunate enough to be invited back to this magnificent place or wherever you're going to be next year, the things you're going to remember are the guy in the gray suit. You're going to remember that. You're going to remember the tellers, and you're probably going to remember my presentation on psychocybernetics. Because we remember stories. It's just the way that we think. All right, so that's success. Any questions on that? All right. Turning back to your handy-dandy handout momentarily. One last question for you, for your team. how long can it take, how long can it take to move something from our short-term memory to our long-term memory? How many seconds, minutes, days, months, years? How long can it take to move something from short-term memory to long-term memory? All right, now you see the little artist deal with the palette. What I want you to do, and I know probably very few of us are artists in here, but it's okay to draw stick figures. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to draw, not counting my slides, but draw a slide that you remember. From behind your face. Tell me if you can, how long does it take to move the short-term, or how long can it take to move the short-term memory to long-term memory? Instantaneous?
Proportional to the instant was.
Proportional to the instant?
Yeah.
Okay. How long? 21 days. I like exact. Negative. Negative, a good point. A negative thing, we definitely remember it. A positive thing, maybe not so much.
I think a lot of it depends on how important it is to you, how much you're invested in it, and how you can apply it.
Absolutely.
I think immediate, but like we were talking, open guys, how good they did in the 911. And that's something that we'll remember. So a lot of things we're talking about, pretty neat.
It's how well what he did us, made us official when he went through it. Sure.
But what was his name? Does anybody know?
He started though bringing you into the scenario of the story, did not? He brought you into the story. It's very, very powerful. However, it can take, of course, it can't be instantaneous. It is dependent on circumstances. It's dependent on positive. It's dependent on all that stuff. But it can take years to move something from short-term memory into long-term memory. So you have 30 seconds to grab your audience's attention. They're going to lose everything you talked about within a few hours, or 50% of it, and all of it within a month. And then some of it, they're never going to remember because it takes so long to move it from one part of the brain to another. We have to be cognizant of that, do we not, when we're doing presentation, to say, okay, what are my important core elements that I want these people to take away from here? How the heck am I going to get them from out here to back here? Let's talk about that for a second. It starts with slide design. I'm going to go back to this guy, my bungee jumper. I like bungee jumping. I like bungee jumping because I look at it and go, I will never, ever, ever do that. There is no way it freaks me out too bad. With the hair on the back of my neck stands up, all that stuff, no way. Someone could push me and I would hold on. But I love this slide. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is action. And the way you do that in a presentation, if you want to show action, something happening, going on, you can do it with a static photo, but you do it with a static photo that's bigger than the screen. Do you notice he has no left arm?
Yeah.
It's off the screen. Actually, this slide isn't that way at all. The actual photo is the entire guy going like this. But I expanded him and pushed him off the screen. I also put him on the left-hand side of the screen. The reason for that is, anytime I need to, I draw a tic-tac-toe board on my slide. I draw a tic-tac-toe board, and I don't really do it on a slide because I don't start in PowerPoint. I start on a sheet of paper, and I generally start with a sticky note. The reason I start with a sticky note, I'm talking about a bigger one. I'm not talking about a little bite-sized one. I start with a bigger sticky note, and I draw my slide. And that way, when I have all my slides drawn out, I can rearrange them. And then when I rearrange them, I go, oh, I might have a presentation here, and I start putting in the PowerPoint. I don't start this. I start with kind of, how do you design the storyboard for the presentation? What is it you're trying to achieve in that presentation? With this is an excellent way to show you where the power of a slide lies. And the first square up there is in the top left-hand corner. And that makes sense, does it not? This is America, we read from left to right. So the first place up here, the number one position is the top left. Now, am I suggesting we write our sentences vertically? Because the second one is right below number one, so should we write vertically? No, because then everyone would think that's unique in a bad way. But it's interesting because if you want to know where the power positions on a slide are, just look on the left-hand side of the slide. And try to position your power elements over there. Now, what's interesting with 4th, 5th, and 6th slots is they jump over to the right-hand side of the slide. And again, I'm not suggesting we start a sentence here, then we jump over to the right-hand side of the word, and we don't do it that way. We don't do it that way. First off, I would advocate not using sentences on slide, but if you have to, just start at the top left and go, just like people are reading. But this is where the power position on the slide are. The 7th position is in the middle at the top. The 8th position is in the middle at the bottom. And here's what's interesting, because we're all taught what? Let's center things. Let's color in the lines. Let's stay within the rules. We're all taught that throughout our lives. However, what's interesting in slides, in presentation, is the middle of the slide is the dead zone. Thanks to Stephen King for that. The middle of the slide is the dead zone. If we want to lose our audience, if we want to say, okay, this is not important, stick it in the middle of the slide. The perfect place for it. Yes, sir.
Where does information come from? I mean, how do you judge what's the power position?
You can look at Cliff Atkinson's book, Beyond Bullet Points. He talks a lot about this stuff. Nancy Duarte, she wrote 2 books, Resonate and Slideology. Both of those are fabulous reads, by the way. And Gar Reynolds, too, with his trilogy of books, he talks about power positions in how you design your slides. And this is all over the internet, of course, which, go to Google. Our brains are at Google now, are they not? I want to stop for a second because I want to get into the hard science, which again comes from Cliff Atkinson's book, Beyond Bullet Points. But before I do that, I want to ask you, Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Are you nervous right now?
Yes.
When you look out on your audience, I know a lot of times when you're in communication, you're seeing a lot of the blank stares. How do you change the audience so there's not,
How do you change the audience if they're having blank stares? One thing I watch for a lot, especially now, is are we doing this? Or are we doing this? What's interesting is because I think all of you have job descriptions that say multitasking. One of the bullet points is multitasking. We understand, of course, we do understand the science behind multitasking. It is physiologically impossible to multitask cognitive things. That's why it is that people who text and drive have just less accidents than the most drunk among us. Because you can't multitask. It's not physiologically possible. We can shift tasks. We can do that. But it answers the question, how do you go about engaging your audience? First off, this is not engaging. Now, what I'd like to talk about is the second bullet point I have here. If we're turning our backs to our audience, it turns them off like that. Bullet points by their nature are on-off switches to the human brain. So I'm not a big advocate of bullet points, and that includes if you use a dog biscuit or anything else for a bullet point, they're still, they're bullet points. I'm not a big advocate. I'm not a big advocate of words on a slide. I'm a big advocate of story. I'm a big advocate of looking at people, staring at people, giving them a second, giving a connection.
Making them nervous.
Making them a little nervous, a little uncomfortable. The other thing is you'll notice you guys had a handy dandy handout today, didn't you? And I had you talk in groups about different things, didn't I? The reason for that is we are a lot better if we're engaged writing and talking with one another than if I'm standing up here lecturing to you guys. You're listening to me drone on for an hour. That's not engaging. That's boring. So it's a matter of, when you get up in front of a group, if you want to engage an audience, divide the audience into 3 sections. And then look at each section. And when I'm looking here, the person behind that person doesn't know what I'm looking at. Here, they're thinking, oh, it's looking beyond me, that person behind. So that's the way that you can help to get. Some people are disengaged naturally. And to those people, I disengage as well. They're not the people I worry about in an audience. The people I worry about are people who are here, connected to me, like many of you are right now. I try to keep you connected in that way. Does that help? Yes, sir.
You said you set up a room. Do you like the way that it's set up? Is that your 3 zones that you just running?
Any room that I go into is generally 3 zones unless there's people behind me. This, if I walk out here, these guys are a little bit harder. They're a little bit behind me. So I have to step back. But I don't use a podium. A podium naturally separates an audience. Sometimes you have to, because the room is so large. The group I talked to that was over 7,500 people was actually at a halftime of the Lady Raiders game when they were right after they won the national championship, the Texas Tech ladies team. And so there was no podium or anything like that, but it was like, hello. You were pretty much surrounded, so you couldn't exactly divide up the room. But that was nice because I didn't know about that stuff at the time. So I wasn't worried about it or nervous about it. The thing too about nervousness is we are naturally, this is not natural. Standing in front of people and talking to them is not natural. I think it was Seinfeld, and I'll get the quote wrong, but he said that, there is surveys that show that we are more afraid of speaking in public than we are of death. And so we'd rather be in the box than doing it. I don't know how accurate that is. Because I'd rather probably be at the edge. But it's natural. What you have to try to do, and I know it's very, very hard, is, and part of it is just simply practice this stuff. But what you have to try to do is you have to try to funnel that nervous energy into positive energy. And I know that's easier said than done. comfortable is to get you guys engaged with something quickly. Like, for instance, in your handy-dandy handout, there's some bullet points, and there's this thing that I want you to work on as far as number of seconds. I can tell you that, but I got you engaged that way. Any other questions? Yes?
I was just gonna make a comment that, one of the things that I agree with everything you said, you gotta have them engaged, part, all of that. But the other thing too is to not necessarily make assumptions. Because the way people look, or unless they're playing with their computer or their phone or whatever. But I often have folks who I'll go at break time and go, is this working for you? Does this make sense? And they go, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever been to. But their face is, they either don't have an affect or they don't seem to be totally engaged. And it was just totally my misinterpretation of what I thought I saw on their face. So that's another thing too, is as long as you do all the things that you've said, you can't necessarily know what people have, what they're showing.
Absolutely. Another question?
I'm a junior in college, and next year I have to present my very long senior thesis. So how hard is it, I guess, to transform research in a sense without bullet points and, I guess, engage your audience and future employers hopefully and that kind of stuff?
Very,
on a
very,
senior thesis?
very, very good question, because all of you, or many of you probably present this in council, or you can present to some other government entity, or you can present in education. Education by its nature loves bullet points. They love bullet points, they love slides full of text, they love boring. Do boring. It's your thesis. Do boring because it's what they want. Do what your audience demands. Your audience demands bullet points, they demand lots of text, they demand that sort of thing. So don't try to be really unique and wonderful, novel, and challenging and humorous. You can use all those things, but use them as your audience dictates. Okay? Yes, sir. I'm going to take one more question, and then I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. I want to get to the final science slide. Go ahead, sir.
I have, I guess, a phobia of using a handout simply because handouts tend to be distractions. I noticed yours is rather Spartan. How do you strike a balance?
I don't generally do a handout for the exact same reason that you're talking about. Handouts by their nature, you've seen it all the time. Someone will give you a 50-page handout, and half the audience is like this. Thumbing through it, you can't hardly hear the speaker because of all the page turning. Handouts are for after the presentation. You can go to my website and get all the notes you want. You can go to my website and get the presentation. You can go to my website and get this handout. I use this handout as an engagement tool for you all. If someone does thumb through it, they're going to thumb through it pretty gosh darn quickly. Right? And if they're going to read the back of it, okay, they're going to read the back of it. But that's how I strike the balance. I generally don't use handouts. And I don't provide my presentation prior to my presentation. That's the balance I strike. All right, let's talk about the final science, because the final science is really, really important. Very critical to your understanding, and this is the core of all of this I hope you take away. There are three memories that we have. The first one out here in front of us is our sensory memory. Sensory memory talks about all the things that we sense, be it through our vision, through smell, through taste, through hearing, through touch, everything coming at us. And by the way, we get 80%, think about people who are visually impaired right now, we get 80% of our understanding through our vision. So it's very, very critical. And those who believe in the junk science of, okay, if it's a visual learner or a tactile learner, there's junk science. We're all visual learners. 80% of our understanding comes through our vision. But all this stuff, all this sensory stuff is coming in mostly through our eyes into our working memory, which for lack of a better place, I put it right behind the eyes. But our working memory then filters all this stuff coming in and says, oh, that's important, I need to keep that. Oh, that's not. And if we start putting too much in through the sensory memory, the working memory is really, really effective at shutting down and not allowing anything in. So it becomes incredibly difficult. Then back here, where I'd like to get this to in your brains, is long-term memory. Because long-term memory allows us to access it later. All of this stuff going through is going through an eye of a needle. It's not a very good needle, but it's the best I can do. Going through an eye of a needle are working memory, and when it's coming in, what's complicating this is it's only coming in through two channels, visual and verbal. It's only coming in through those two channels. And if we have a slide that's filled with bullet points, and we're reading to our audience, as we're reading, they're watching the bullet points, they're looking at things, all that stuff's coming in, and our working memory is shutting down. That's why it's so, so essential to have the core elements of what it is you want your audience to walk away with on each and every single slide in addition to your presentation. All right, so we covered three things, a little bit of my history. I gave you a couple of tools you can use, lots of quotes and things like that. Look at TED Talks, if you haven't seen TED stuff, they have some great presentations there. I listed just a few on the back. They're free, they're less than 18 minutes each, so they're doing a great job. And we covered the science of this thing called presentation. The reason I covered the science was really, really critical because I didn't want to give you a bunch of do's and a bunch of don'ts. I can't give you the list. It changes all the time, and it changes by audience. But you understand the science now. You understand why it is so necessary to keep it simple, do unexpected things, be concrete, be critical, credible, have some emotion, tell some stories. Thanks you all for your time. I very much appreciate it. Let me know if I can help.
So Maurice is good. The one I went to. Oh, how you doing? Back in the room here.
That was good.